Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video. I am Sean Ramon Moore, and this is my reflection paper. I want to start out by explaining that I have now probably had more ministerial experience as in leading than I have in the military and law enforcement, but I'm just now moving out of that arena as for time served. So I've probably served, I think, 12 to 14 years in law enforcement, military, security, kind of a background, and then I moved into ministry. And so I think this is like year 15 in ministry when I was in year 15 in ministry compared to years being served in the military. But being in the military has served me well as it relates to leadership and management, and a great deal of that will play itself out in this report. So some of the things that I've seen inform the way I think. So I want to read the question and then move into some of the resources that I reviewed to get to the point that I'm going to say in this video. So number one, the question is, based upon assigned resources for this model, write a brief 1 to 2 page reflection paper on the role of management, mindset, and the practice of leading in your local church. And so, of course, here are the resources that I used. I used The Gift of Administration. That was the book that we were assigned to read. I did watch all the videos. They're going to come into play. There was an article that I read by Katie Tyana, Tyana, and she is a writer for the Harvard Business Review. I also looked at Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. He's a jiu-jitsu person. I'm a jiu-jitsu person. He's also a Navy SEAL and a leader. And so those are the things that I kind of looked at as it relates to this video. So I want to start out with Katie's kind of article, and when she argues that, do you have a manager's mindset? And within this, she gives us 5 criteria of what it means to be a good manager. And the first one is focus on the what and when. So she makes a point on as managers, you need to have 2 things solid in your head, and that is, what are the deliverables, right? And when do they need to be completed? Which, outside of that, not being a micromanager or not trying to have control over things, but inspiring people through multiple ways to get them to figure out what are the deliverables and then how they need to be completed. So I thought that was interesting. Trust your gut was another concept that she had. And as a former military person, there are so many variables that take place. And also being on a SWAT team, so I was on a SWAT team for a while. And there are so many different variables that could take place that may be very problematic for you and your team. So you got to trust your gut. One thing that I'm not good at, that she argues that you have to be, this mindset, is being patient. I tend to struggle with being patient. So that's something that I have to kind of get straight in my head, and also to be a better leader and a better manager, having more patience. Take the long view, right? So you want to be able to see what's way ahead of you. I call it vision casting, but she says to have this mindset, you need to be able to see the long view. And lastly, asking really good questions. So I thought that was a really good article that I happened to read from the podcast, which was called Balancing Leadership and Management. There are lots of things in this kind of podcast that I thought, man, these are really good concepts, and I thought they were well. I'll share them with you now. The number one thing that I thought was interesting was their definition of management, which their definition of management is to get the results of the organization, to get the results the organization is asking from them. That's the number one responsibility of a manager. And not that I don't agree with that. I just thought it was interesting. I didn't completely agree, and I didn't completely disagree. I understood what they were saying, and there was enough substance, like, okay, I'll give that kind of the thumbs up. So that was good. But there's this desired results that come from somewhere else. And I think as it relates to the church, each organization needs to figure out what its desired outcomes are going to be. Let's see. I also thought it was interesting that they said that one of the reasons why people don't see leadership and management the same in a church was because the quote was, "Managers rely on control, but leaders inspire." I'm not sure about that. I've never had a job in which I was placed in a position of leadership to where I didn't have to also manage and do them well. My very first job as a leader happened to be in the military while I was in boot camp, and I was serving the mess galley, and I was placed in charge of, I think it was 6 other men, and we were in charge of bread, right? And so you're thinking, that's not a big responsibility. It was huge. Our job was to make sure that everyone on the base had bread and how to do so effectively. So that was my very first major leadership / management job there. And we didn't separate them. I don't think you can separate management from leadership. And if you can, then you can. But on the podcast, they argue that management is the process of reaching organizational goals by working with and through people. I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's just kind of the standard of which it is. So, I mean, a good manager will be able to reach the organization with working with folks and through people. That's solid. I think here are some key characteristics of what it meant to be a good manager. Being able to communicate well. I think that's highly important to be able to communicate to the best of your ability as it relates to other individuals. Modeling the values of an organization, of course. Caring for the individual team members that they lead. Providing good coaching, listening well, and removing barriers. Yeah, I think if you are going to manage, again, how do I separate leadership from management? I can't. Because each one of those things you have to be able to do for yourself and to do for others, and that's leadership. But you also have to manage it. But going back to the statement, to get the results the organization is asking for them, I think that's a particular thing to managing something, whether it's people or processes or whatever it might be. Let's see. Pastoral skills in management. Why don't churches do well? And they kind of talked about this in the podcast, and I can literally see these things impacting any organization, whether it is a church or a non-church organization. And I've got something that just popped in my head that I'll save it until afterwards. But here are the things in which, if you want to do them both well, you have to be able to do these things. And they said, clear expectations, right? Being very clear. Consistent one-on-ones reports, right? And so you want to meet with all your leaders at least once a month. Some of them are saying, bi-weekly. Take good notes. I think that's something that I struggle with. I don't do well with taking notes well, but it's something that I'm working on. What I do though, I do record everything, right? And so if I'm in a conversation with someone, I'll pull out my phone and say, okay, to help me remember what was going to say, I'm going to record this message, and then I've got recordings from almost all my meetings because recordings work well for me. I think it was interesting when they said uncomfortable conversations. So being former military, former law enforcement, on a SWAT team for almost 14 years, I have no problem having uncomfortable conversations with anyone about anything as it relates to the church, especially if it has to do with underachieving goals. So right now I'm the associate pastor of Living Spirit, in which at some point at June of 2021, I will become the senior pastor. of Living Spirit, because I'm now in the associate role, just kind of learning the culture and what's going on. I recognize there are a few issues as it relates to conflict that nobody wants to deal with. They kind of linger out there. I'm wondering, why won't anyone kind of deal with these things? Because these issues literally kind of deal with some issues that are going on within the church. So that's that. As it relates to extreme ownership, this book right here, I'm just going to read one quick passage that has kind of laid out how I understand leadership. Okay. It says here, extreme ownership requires leaders to look at an organization's problems through the objective lens of reality without emotional attachment to agendas or plans. And I think for myself, the best leaders and managers that I've ever seen perform at a high quality during very stressful situations have always been those in the military. And so I do have a bias, and I'll just share it with you. My bias is when it comes to leading and managing, the best managers and leaders come from the military because of the dark science of having to end a life or save your own life. And so I think that when you have issues of life and death that are literally on the line, like if you do it wrong, you will be dead, things radically change. And so whether it's right or wrong, I've always seen myself, I've always taken skills and insights that I've learned from the military and have applied them to my church background. I tend, and this is something that I need to work through, I tend to not pay a great deal of attention to words that are being said that don't come from folks who are not on the front lines. And this is not to say that there's nothing to learn out of the books that I'm reading in the class. It's not to say that I don't think being in this particular course isn't going to do well for me. But I'm very, very leery of leadership / management models that aren't being delivered or come from someone who's like, yep, here's what it means to do this and to do it well, because if you don't do it well, someone's going to die. And when you take life and death that serious, you cannot make mistakes because people's lives are on the line. And not that this isn't going to be a lovely course. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that as it relates to my mindset, as it relates to being a leader and managing in the church, I tend to read a great deal on those individuals who are on the front lines, and not because they're better. It's just that there's more law. So if you make a bad mistake in the business world and we lost $1 million or something of that degree, is how my mind is kind of operating. But if you don't do this correctly, we're going to lose these 15 people, or this whole entire town will be destroyed. So I think that's the thing that is always on the front part of my mind. And as for the gift of administration, I have to say that I talked about this in my first assignment, the idea of the struggle of separating things. Like, how do you separate leadership from management, right? I can't do so, and I don't see it being a real life thing where you can actually separate the two. But here's some things from this book that I found to be also interesting. It says, most recently, theology has properly realized that all Christians, through their baptism, are called to serve the mission of the church to the world. I don't know. I grew up as a Christian thinking that we were all called to the mission of the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. That every Christian, if you say that you are a disciple, which the word there is matitheo, right, a dedicated student. If you are a dedicated student, then you need to be obedient, and obedient is just simply following the natural order of things. And so the natural order of being a dedicated student is to actually be about the mission and vision of Jesus Christ. And so I don't have anything to argue against that. I think it's solid. I think it's cool. Let's see. Most effective human organizations, from the Rotary Club to the U.S. military to Microsoft to the corner grocery store, needs to understand its purpose and stay tuned to its mission. This is on page 51, and the last quote was on page 50. And so I think that both of those things are foundational for the mission of the church to move it forward. So those are my views on administration, leadership, and mission and vision. Hopefully this works well. Take care. Peace.